We had a cut, which I think Don and Jerry and Tony came to, obviously, and everybody loved it. Harold was even there, the composer.
Yes.
We had the composer on. He was there, and it was clearly going to be great. I don't even think we had the cockpit material in there yet. And Tony then is given, traditionally, I guess, 8 or 10 weeks. And he worked with us, and we showed the movie, and I remember the reaction from, I think, Don maybe, being that it felt like one long sunset.
I don't know what he was thinking. It was the most beautiful film I've ever seen. The planes were gorgeous, but there wasn't much of a story left.
It was like the biggest nightmare screening ever. Harold Faltermeyer, afterwards said, "How am I going to get off this film? This is confusing."
People didn't understand what was going on in the air. The first cut was it was just confusing. People got lost in terms of the speed and the movement and who was doing what to who. Tony was very nervous afterwards. Uh-oh, they didn't like it. This is not good.
Don had a fit, called his agent and said, "I'm going to fire him off the movie. This is a disaster. I don't know what we're going to do." And I saw the dailies. I knew we had a terrific movie there. It was just a matter of getting in there and going through it. So we did. Don, myself, Tony, and our editor sat in there every single day, went through every frame of the film that he'd cut together, and explained to him what we felt was missing and what other footage he had. And slowly but surely we got the film to where it became the Top Gun that everybody is familiar with.
So Tony, in his effort to attempt to bring a lot of the visual snap to it, derailed it a little bit, you'd have to say. Did you recall it that way?
Yeah. It was a little dicey right after that screening.
And it was totally confusing because they hadn't really solved the story of in the air. They hadn't made enough out of the air part of the story.
I lost him, Goose. Show me what you got, kid.
Well, for me, it's coming on when the aerial material just started. There wasn't a story for those scenes. There was a kind of rough sketch of them.
Yeah, I mean, they got my storyboards, obviously, and I obviously had a very clear vision about what I wanted to do. But even though I shot all that aerial footage specifically to particular boards, when we got in the cutting room, we had to adapt it because no matter how much of a visionary you are, it's hard to anticipate, all those different things happening.
Well, Tony might think there would be storyboards, but he shoots so much material usually, especially with this flying material, that didn't conform to any story, that I would say there wasn't, although we were provided boards.
For that? Were we?
Yeah,
For
he
Top
used
Gun?
to say, "Follow my boards, man."
On Top Gun? He would? I remember him doing that
Well, he did it on
later,
the other ones.
on other movies, but I don't remember it on Top
he-
Gun. But
he
maybe he
made-
did. Maybe, that's very possible.
No, storyboard, nobody.
But I mean,
they're
that
not
was
even
impossible. I mean, because the air footage, the story of the flying footage was created in the cutting room with the help of the pilots, telling us what was going on, what kind of language that the actors should use, what they should say when they bank and stuff like that. And we were so lucky in some cases that they had masks on, the actors, because then we could just stick dialogue into their shots.
any dialogue.
Yeah.
Any dialogue.
Because they were talking, they were rolling sound when they were shooting the cockpit footage, but the kind of stuff they were saying was, see if my assistant is here. She was supposed to bring me a juice.
Goose, I've had about enough of this shit. When it hit the brakes, I'll fly right by.
We would grab footage to try and make the scene work, and then they would tell us whether or not it was real and what would be said in a certain point. And
then we'd get wild lines of the actors recording it and pop them into the shots of their masks, which they were never saying those lines, and create the aerial footage around that line to make it look like it was happening.
Woo! Let's see what you got now, Chester.
And that we would just steal footage. We would get very upset with each other when we go into a roll of film and there wouldn't be a piece, and I'd go to Chris and I'd say, "You raped this roll."
Yeah, because there was really the scenes where there wasn't really a story for those scenes yet. I mean, it was scripted, but it was a case where the the film kind of chased the story rather than conform to it.
I remember there's this whole bit where Tom Cruise has the medallion from Goose, and he returns in the heat of the battle at the end, and that was totally fabricated from little bits and pieces and shots and little pickups that they did. So that they really created a movie out of it. And when you think about like what is the best picture editing award like for the Academy Awards, no one has any idea how this stuff gets made up, and you look at it at face value, oh, it's okay, it's cool. But if people knew what they created out of that material, that was by far the best edited film I think I ever worked on, really.
And all the best stuff of the aerial stuff is in the movie.
Yeah,
mean,
I'd say there's not a
no-
frame
no question.
that was any good that isn't in the picture. We were asked once, somebody actually called me from Paramount saying they were going to do Top Gun 2. And I said, oh, wow, you're going to go shoot 100,000 feet of flying footage again? You're going to have to go back to the government and get all that. And they said, no, we'll just use whatever you didn't use in the first one. That's where we're going to get the footage. And I said, there's nothing. There's absolutely nothing. And they said, oh, there's got to be. I said, trust me, there is nothing. I think somebody went and looked at the footage, too.
It figures, and they never made the
That's
sequel.
why it hasn't been made. There were two attempts at a similar scene for the end of the movie. Both of them, I think, took place out at the jet on the runway of the airport. He taxis his plane to a landing, gets out of the plane, and Kelly shows up, and they have some little reunion. I think they walk to a Jeep and drive off.
That's right.
It was really bad. Kelly couldn't come to terms with it and didn't really get a handle on the character in that scene, and we shot it twice, and both times it sucked. And so the last time, in the context of the movie, we went back after we'd cut the movie and said, you know, it's a real corny beat going to the same bar at the end, you know, with the Righteous Brothers playing on the jukebox there. But it was corny, but it was right for the movie. Just before we were done with the movie, but very close to finishing the mix, a week away from the mix, we'd cut negative on the movie. We were done. They had 3 exhibitor screenings. I think I remember the details of this. They had an exhibitor screening on the West Coast. They had one in Chicago and one in New York. And the West Coast and New York screenings went great for the exhibitors. The Chicago exhibitor screening, apparently the exhibitors walked out and they loved the movie, and they all wished that it had more of a love story or a love scene. And that word came back, and they said, okay, we're going to shoot a love scene. We felt we needed that sexual, needed Maverick to bonk Kelly. And we just felt it needed it in terms of the character, and the movie felt that jolt of sex was pretty cool right then. Yeah, and I was good at shooting sex scenes then. And Tom was shooting Color of Money in Chicago. Kelly was not shooting anything but had cut all of her hair off. It was all very short. And so Tony and the crew, Don and Jerry, I guess, and
Went to Chicago.
flew to Chicago and got permission from Color of Money, from Scorsese. Could they shoot that Sunday, one day with Tom? So they flew Kelly there. They put a baseball cap on her, which you can see in the scene in the elevator when Cruise gets into the elevator. She's wearing a baseball-style cap. Cruise is all wet, like he just got out of the shower. And his hair is all wet down because his hair was completely different for Color of Money than it had been for the movie. So we reshot that scene in the elevator.
We shot in the elevator like all day. Tom had to leave at like 6 or whatever his hour was. And so we probably, if it was say 6 o'clock, we shot till 5:45, but we had another shot to do. So they hopped us in the van. We ran over to the stage where we were going to shoot, where they had this little bedroom set. I just had time to plug in one light. So we wheeled the light out the window, turned it on. Tom walked in, ripped off his shirt, kissed the girl a couple times, I've said goodbye.
We got the dailies Monday morning. It was cut by noon. We cut the elevator scene and the love scene by noon. Don and Jerry and Tony came to the cutting room. We looked at it, made some very minor changes. That's it. Cut it into the movie. Bob Battermy, our music editor, cut the song by Berlin
Yeah, that's
that
right.
ended up winning an Oscar to that scene.
It went over the love scene.
Went over the love scene and took it to the mixing stage, and I think we
That was
finished
that.
mixing that Friday, but we didn't have all the songs in yet, and we'd lost all of our mixing time. And so we used to go in at 3 o'clock in the morning
Oh yeah, we had that
and
night
mix,
shift week.
yes, and mix till 8 in the morning, go to breakfast, come back and mix till noon. And that's how we finished the mix
Because
of the movie.
somebody else had booked the time, but we were hiding it from them that we were using their mixers at night.
Yeah.
Because the mixers were 24 hours, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was our graveyard
That
period.
was how we finished the mix of the movie. The first preview we ever had of the movie for an audience, we were previewing at the studio, and it was a great screening. The audience loved it, but the studio wasn't convinced that this would play as well outside of the studio, that it play as well as it did there. So they made us take it to Dallas for a preview, and of course we took it to Dallas to preview 4 days after the space shuttle blew up. So we thought, oh great, this is going to be awful, especially the whole flat spin sequence in the movie where the goose dies. This is going to be awful.
These things are very nerve-wracking for anybody who's worked on the movie because your whole life flashes in front of you, your whole career flashes in front of you. And since Don and I didn't have a huge body of work, we've made some successful movies, but you know, every movie counts. And we go down there and we have a screening and nobody reacts. It was dead.
And Jerry came up to us, Tony and I, who were sitting together, said, you played it too loud. You didn't give the audience a chance to hear themselves laugh when at the funny stuff or to hear themselves react. It was all too loud. It's a disaster.
So the half an hour while they're processing the cards and we're sitting there thinking that it's all over, and if there was a window to jump out of, we'd have jumped out of it. Unfortunately, it was on the first floor, so we couldn't do any damage.
And then, of course, this movie had played better than it had ever played. The numbers on it were fantastic, and that's when we realized that the movie was going to be a hit.
The movie was actually in the theaters for a year straight. Stayed in the theater for one complete year. Was really, I think, #1 only once or twice. For pretty much it stayed in the top 10, but it just kept playing and playing and playing.
It was a great feeling to see it with long lines and playing in theaters forever. Is it didn't, if I recall, open as movies do now with huge numbers. It just steadily played through the whole summer. Wherever I would go, they were playing Top Gun, and we were hearing the songs on the radio for months.
The film just came out at an amazing time. I mean, I think everything is timing. It's the key is timing. You know, the film came out at a time when it was right. The public wanted it. It was really something they were ready for. I mean, the right producers who could shoot the movie and do it right, get it up there. A military who wanted it and was willing to be open and do it. Just, you know, where we were as writers and what we had to personally say and how it was important to us. There was so much happening that made that movie work that it just, you can see in retrospect, you know, looking back, why it was successful. It just as easily could not have been. I mean, so one just never knows. You put it together, you throw it out there, and it just works or it doesn't. And sometimes it works better. And this just touched a real emotional chord, and it still does. I mean, it really still works.
I'm very proud of having been a part of it, and of course when you're doing it you don't feel that way because when you're doing it, you don't know whether it's going to be any good or not, and your name's on it. I remember when I went to the premiere, there were 900 fighter pilots in this movie theater, and I'm there, and I've been so close to it that I didn't know whether it was any good or not, and my name's on it, and I didn't know if I was going to come out with my kneecaps. In the end, you know, I came out and everybody said, well, yeah, it's pretty good, it's okay, it's not realistic, you know, it's wrong here, it's wrong there, you know, and things like that. Well, a couple weeks later when their kids saw it and their girlfriends saw it and there were a lot of babes on Wednesday night at the Miramar Oak Club, you know, all of a sudden they're willing to accept anything.
Up to that point, there hadn't really been a movie that portrayed airplanes as real characters and the guys that flew them as realistic people, other than the swashbuckling kind of guys, because they really weren't.
So many fighter pilots, the guys I knew, called and said, this was the first time I could take my family to a movie and say, this is what I do. See, this is what it's like. This is who I am.
In fact, a friend of my parents was an airline pilot, and to this day he thinks that nobody's ever captured the way it feels to fly. And he flies, you know, for United or something, so it's a little scary. But nobody's ever captured it like that movie did.
It was fun to be associated with that project, and it winds up, my daughter was born in December of that year, and she was never going to get to know Dad, the Navy fighter pilot. So now the movie would always be a place that she could go and see Dad, the fighter pilot, instead of the old airline guy that I am.
I'm proud of it. It's the best flying movie, unless you count The Great Waldo Pepper.
It was a world that nobody knew about. I mean, now it sounds like, oh yeah, fighter pilots, oh sure. Believe me, before this movie came out, they were not on the radar scope. You didn't have phrases like, I feel the need for speed, you know, edge of the envelope, crash and burn. I mean, these things were not part of our vernacular. And since it just seems very natural. And we sort of see ourselves as a fighter pilot. We just had our president on an aircraft carrier from out of Top Gun. I mean, it's really become deeply ingrained in the culture. And who could have seen that coming? You don't expect it.
I mean, you think about the cultural impact of Top Gun. You've Lost That Loving Feeling, the song. I was at a wedding, I think, this summer. You know, it's 20 years. And You Lost That Loving Feeling came on. The band's playing You've Lost That Loving. Half the wedding turned around and looked at me. You know, it was like, I'm not even in the damn sequence in the film. They expect me to jump up and start singing the goddamn song.
It got me out of trouble once. I was in Yugoslavia making a picture, and I was in an airport. This is about 1989, I think, and I was filming something, and this Yugoslavian cop came up and, you can't film in the airport, you can't do it, you know, this is all, and they brought me back to this interrogation room, and I said, listen, I was in this movie Top Gun, and all of a sudden they looked at me like, oh yeah, oh, okay, yeah, okay, no problem. So, you know, it's had its perks, I guess.
I got a telephone in my bathroom at Paramount. It was the first big change. I said, it's happening. I can sit on the toilet and actually make my calls. And so I knew I moved up, because part of that I had this shitty little office on the corner of the lot. Then I moved into Don and Jerry's building, and life changed.
It allowed me to move out of the country for a few years, you know, because those checks from heaven would just come to the mailbox, you know, and that only happens if they're a success.
And we affected fashion. Everyone got a haircut after that movie.
It was the biggest, you know, promotional film for the Navy ever. I mean, I think their enrollment went up 35–40% the week it opened.
They had recruiting booths outside theaters and malls. I think it went up almost a third.
Obviously, the movie has had a huge effect on the Navy in general, on Top Gun, on recruiting. I mean, recruiting just went sky high. And in fact, I remember about 10 years later, I had guys coming up to me when they found out that I was the technical advisor on Top Gun, and they'd get mad at me because, you know, they'd say, hey, you're the guy that got me into the Navy, and now I'm flying fighters, and it's nothing like what I thought it was going to be like, and it's all your fault.
You know, everybody saw, I want to be a Top Gun guy. That's what I want to do. Well, I can tell you, you know, what they didn't capture in the real Top Gun is that, you know, again, the guys, and not just the guys, and we're blessed. We're the guys that get to go do the glory stuff. You know, I remember a carrier goes out, there's 6,500 kids that are making sure you get to go do the glory stuff. But the time away from home, the 8-month deployments, that's the side of Top Gun that I think some of the giant bow wave that wanted to do that realized, you know what, not only is this not as glamorous, but you know what, it's pretty damn hard too. It's pretty damn hard. I think it's, when you think about, you know, 1,000 people, you know, numbers, you know, out of 1,000 people, maybe 1 or 2 guys are going to be able to be fighter pilots.
All these kids must hate me because they all signed on thinking they're going to be fighter pilots pulling broads all over the world, and they all ended up, you know, 11 stories down in some shitty old aircraft carrier stuck in the Indian Ocean.
The aftermath of the film, it actually exceeded all of our expectations. Top Gun ended up with brand new airplanes, happened to be F-16s, a brand new building, and a whole amount of distraction that they hadn't anticipated in terms of visitors and tour buses and other kinds of distractions showing up all the time. Probably the funniest part of it was, at the time, And I don't think people realize how small Top Gun was at the time. There were only 18 instructors when the movie was made. And at that time, there'd been less than 200, probably total Top Gun instructors ever. Now, on Wednesday nights at the Officers Club, they'd open the gates to women who wanted to visit the club. And on those Wednesday nights, it was packed. I would say probably a couple thousand people. Now, on those nights also, there were probably 500 or 600 Top Gun instructors at the Officers Club. In fact, on one occasion, I was with the staff and you know, just visiting with them, and they were over in a corner, and they would typically go in the back in the corner and just watch the carnage. And they noticed a guy with a perfect regalia, the right patches, the right T-shirt, everything right, perfectly designed as a Top Gun instructor. So they went up to him and approached him and asked him, you know, when he joined the staff, and he admitted that he was a Coast Guard officer and he just bought all this stuff. And so I feel very bad for the poor women who all met Top Gun instructors but probably didn't in the era after that particular movie.
In hindsight, I'd say it was a fun experience, but movies are always a tough experience. That was tougher for me because it was my second movie and there's a lot at stake. Yeah.
Tony Scott was a great choice. I mean, it was an unlikely choice because the movie Tony had done before that was The Hunger. So you're not thinking of Tony Scott shooting a fighter pilot movie. But what makes a picture stand out? It's the right people coming together. It's the unlikely elements that really make it happen. And a lot of people came together who, at this time, this was important in their careers. They were really trying to prove something. So everybody had a lot at stake in this movie, and I think it really shows on the screen. I think there's a lot of energy, enthusiasm that sort of plays all the way through down to, you know, the actors and the crew.
It's like a milestone in your life. It's one of those things you look back on, and now almost 20 years later, you know, it's like a different life almost.
It was just a great experience. It was a great experience. I had so much fun. I just had an absolute ball making the movie.